Even now, when I think about it, it feels crazy that I left my family when I was in my early 20s to go to a country that was more than 7,000 miles away from home. And I came here with a small suitcase and lots of ambitions and plans and dreams.
Hello, and welcome to Behind Numbers. Today's episode is a powerful one. In this conversation, we talk about what it really takes to move from India to the US with nothing but ambition, and what it's really like to lead finance in a mission driven company trying to change how cancer is treated. But one insight stood out to me the most. Success sometimes starts with something that is super easy, as just showing up at the starting line. Pushkar, it's a pleasure to have you on Behind Numbers.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thanks for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you here. But prior to going inside roles, inside titles, I would like to know you better. So can you tell us a bit more of who you are? Where are you coming from?
Absolutely. Again, thanks for having me. Born and raised in Mumbai, which was Bombay back then when I was growing up. And so did my schooling, childhood days, and then also college in Mumbai. I grew up surrounded by doctors in my early days, and I had a very strong passion for life sciences and healthcare and making a strong impact on people's lives. And no other industry comes as close as life sciences in terms of making that impact. Then over the years, ended up spending a lot of time surrounded by people who were actually making a tremendous positive impact to patients' lives. And to this day, when I look back, I'm grateful for making that choice.
So my first questions here, you mentioned that you grew up with doctors. Can you tell us more why? Because your family or someone in your family was a doctor?
My grandfather on my maternal side was a family physician. My mom herself was a paramedic. All my uncles and aunts were specialists in their fields of various specialties in radiology, in cardiology, in sports medicine, in pathologies. And growing up in this ecosystem as a child, saw a lot of patients visit my grandfather. And sometimes I would see them walk into the house, and just seeing him would bring a smile to their face. And they would say that just seeing him makes us feel better. And as a child growing up, that had a very profound impact on my thinking. And I thought that this is amazing, right? That he hasn't even said anything. He hasn't even diagnosed her or him, but he's had such an amazing impact on their well-being. That was really the early days, right? Where just getting exposed to that ecosystem and patient-physician relationship and that interaction had a very strong impact on the way I grew up.
Almost all your family was or a physician or a doctor. So why then choosing finance?
That's a great question. Growing up in India in school, most of the subjects that you see kids learning today, like physics, chemistry, biology, maths, were part of the academic program. What was not in the program was studying about business. And I remember as I was finishing up school, my older brother actually for the first time ended up choosing commerce or bachelor's in business as a course of study. And I started reading his books while he was in college and was very intrigued by the way business is done, not only in India, but also abroad. And that notion was very new because that was a subject that was not taught in schools back then. And that was the draw that pulled me into business. But in the back of the mind, it was always like, I need to somehow bridge that gap and bring it back to life sciences. And as I studied business more and more, and just fate had it that when I was in grad school, Novartis came to the campus, and I thought this is my chance to kind of bridge that gap and bring it back home.
Going back just for a second, because you told us about that you started in the audit in Deloitte in KPMG and that you were in India. Why did you then at a certain point thought, I don't want to stay any longer here, I want to go to US? Which were the things that were missing there?
Well, absolutely. While I was at KPMG in audit, I was also doing US GAAP audits, which meant that a lot of multinational companies that were either listed on the NASDAQ were being audited by KPMG. And as I was studying these companies, zooming out, right, and pulling myself out of the Indian context, started appealing me a lot, right? Where I said, okay, not only am I looking at companies outside of India, but now I'm looking at it from a global standpoint. And that ability to zoom out from on the ground to 10,000 feet up and looking at that holistic picture started feeling a lot appealing. And everyone I was working with at the time, who I said, okay, how do I move from auditing to consulting so that I get a chance to learn about business strategy of these large multinationals, said to me that the only way to do that is to do a MBA. And Boston University at the time was one school that caught my attention. A bunch of clients that I was working with were also based in Boston, and ended up applying to that school for the graduate program.
Were you scared of coming to the US, or were you more excited of coming here, or did you have some mixed feelings? Maybe you were leaving all your family there to come here. How actually were your feelings?
That's a very interesting question, Alessandro. Back then, once I decided that I want to go to the States to pursue my graduate program at MBA at Boston University, it was almost like I had tunnel vision. I was not thinking about anything else. And the next thing I know was I was on a flight. It was a Lufthansa flight. I still remember on the 22nd of August in 2002. I was all set to get on that flight and fly to Boston. I'd never been to the States before. I'd never traveled internationally by then. And it was a big trip. But at the time, there was nothing stopping me. I was all set to go. And then, funnily, about 10 years later, or maybe 15 years later, as I was starting to plan to have my own family, the thought crossed my mind that I was 24 at the time when I traveled to the US. And it felt like a crazy decision, right? I mean, even now, when I think about it, it feels crazy that I left my family when I was in my early 20s to go to a country that was more than 7,000 miles away from home. And I came here with a small suitcase and lots of ambitions and plans and dreams. But to answer your question now, in hindsight, it feels crazy that I made that leap of faith. But at the time, I was so focused on getting to that goal that there was no feeling of fear or anxiety or anything like that.
Every single time that I'm talking with someone that started a company, they are always stating the same thing. I just started it. If I would have known everything that would have involved and all the sweat and tears, all the problems, maybe I wouldn't have done it. And it seems that it's the same thing. So you were just focused on coming here and then doing it. Now, after 15 plus years, maybe you will think I was crazy by that time, but it is what brought you here and it is what led you then to be also the CFO of several companies. I feel that sometimes being that crazy, it is a good thing. It is a good thing because it is what can lead you to your next level.
You bring up an interesting concept, Alessandro. In fact, that experience also taught me a lesson in life, right, which I use a lot in my roles lately, or even my personal life, which was just show up at the starting line. Showing up to the starting line is like 80% of the battle sometimes, right? A lot of people kind of miss out on all the excitement and the adventures that come after because they don't show up the day off. And later in life now, as I got into my 40s, I started getting a bit into fitness. And I've been running, I cycle a lot as well, and I've done half marathons. And what I've seen now is just showing up at the start line takes a lot of courage and conviction. But once you show up at the start line, the rest of it is easy. And so that early lesson, right, when I came to the States, I think was an example of that, that really taught me a big lesson that just show up and then everything else will follow.
I love it. Love it. You need to be at that start line and you need to start. If you start, you will probably end up in a good spot, no matter what it is going to happen. But then, fast forward, you have now been in leadership roles. And I was just thinking how different it is to work in India and to work here. Which are the major things that you have seen that are really so different between the two worlds?
The one big difference that I remember thinking about, right, when I started working here at Novartis was this notion of hierarchy, right? You must have heard that in Asian cultures, the notion of hierarchy is very, very important, right? The top boss kind of leads the tone of the organization and then everyone follows. And so I remember in my early days with KPMG and Deloitte, there was this notion that the partner of the firm was the top boss. They used to sit in the ivory tower. We would see them only for signatures on documents. And then when I came to the States, it was very different. The structure of the organization was very flat, right? Where bosses who were 3 or 4 levels above me also would stop by my desk, sometimes sit down with me, roll up their sleeves and work on projects that I was working on. And that felt very different because I was not used to that flat structure of the organization. But since then, I'm sure things have changed. When I go back now and see my friends and ex-coworkers who are still in that system, they say that things have changed dramatically now and those differences have melted away.
It is funny to hear it because I come from a different country, but it seems that the way that we look at the boss in my country, in Italy, it is pretty similar to the Indian one. While when I moved over here in the US, I'm always stating that here the CEO, it is more a walking CEO. He or she would walk past all the offices, would enter inside the office, would ask how he or she could help you out. So it was really different here. And again, going to your latest leadership role as CFO at Nusano, I would like to know more about Nusano and what they are trying to do because I feel that it is something fascinating. So I would like you to tell the audience what the company does.
Nusano is a spectacular company. I take a step back before I introduce Nusano. I got introduced to radiopharmaceuticals while I was at Novartis. Novartis had acquired a company around 2018 focused on radiotherapy. And at the time, it was a very new modality in cancer care, in oncology. It's basically personalized medicine where a patient gets an infusion of a drug and the small molecule along with a radioisotope goes into the bloodstream and goes directly to the cancer cells and deploys radiation at a cellular level. And so the impact of this radiation is very localized, is very personalized, and contained within a very small area compared to chemotherapy, which we all know was radiation delivered across the entire body. And so therefore, the number of side effects and issues that the patient had to deal with were a lot more. And so radiotherapy was a very interesting novel treatment that came about in the 2018, 2019 timeframe, and I was exposed to it for the first time. What became very clear over the next few years as Novartis launched these drugs into this space was the modality is clearly here to stay. The impact on patients' lives have been nothing short of a miracle. When you see PET scans of patients before and after treatment, it's amazing how well the therapy works. Now, the issue was the supply of the isotope that goes into radiotherapy is still limited and constrained. There are not a lot of companies around the world that can make radioisotopes at scale. So at Novartis, when I saw that shortage in the supply of radioisotopes, this was definitely playing on my mind. And at the time, I ended up connecting with the founders of Nusano. And the founders of Nusano have come up with a very innovative approach of manufacturing radioisotopes at scale. When I saw that, it felt like that was really the key to unlock the tremendous value that this modality can bring to patients over the coming years. They're expecting this modality to be worth over $40 billion in the next 5 years. But the biggest unlock needed was the manufacturing of isotopes, which is still in short supply. And so Nusano has taken on that audacious task of making isotopes at scale. Hopefully, they're able to get to the finish line soon. And I'm eager to see that day when we can again help cancer patients around the world to get access to this therapy.
And I'm wondering because you are the chief financial officer. So let me simplify it extremely. But on the chief financial officer side, you need to make sure that the numbers make sense and you need to make sure that you're not spending too much, or you need to make sure that you do have the runway to get to the point that you can start producing them and then selling them. But you're also a very mission driven person. And as a mission driven person, maybe you will see that you are really so close. You just need to spend some more. So, how can you balance the two things? From one side, I need to make sure that we're not spending too much. From the other side, your mission driven approach, which is we could save so many patients out there. So, how can you balance those two things?
No, absolutely. That's a very good question, Alessandro, and requires tremendous focus to stay committed to the actual goal of the company. The goal of the company is to get to the finish line and start making isotopes so that we can help patients get access to this treatment. But you're right. The challenge on a day-to-day basis is managing those priorities because on one hand, you don't want to run out of money, On the other hand, you don't want to disappoint the world by not making these isotopes. It takes intense prioritization, almost ruthless prioritization, as I like to call it, in terms of making sure that we are investing and spending in the right areas at the right point in time so that we don't take the eyes off the ball. And so constantly reminding ourselves that the eventual goal here is to treat every cancer patient around the world with these life-saving isotopes so that we can improve the quality of life and really have an impact on the world with this therapy.
We are always closing the podcast with one question. So, if you could go back and change one thing, only one thing, with which could be a decision, a mindset, or even something that you would have liked to know before, what would it be and why?
That's a loaded question, Alessandro. And when I think of that, there's nothing I would like to change really, because I feel that who I am today is a culmination of all those experiences, all those relationships, all those people that I've met along the way, the thousands of shoulders that I've stood upon to get here. And there's so much more to go. And I feel blessed and thankful for having met those people at the right point in time. And thankful to my family and parents for giving me those experiences in the early days. And yeah, when I reflect back on that, I don't think there is a single thing I would like to change in this journey.
So, I did have so many people in this podcast that were telling me the same thing. And it's
Okay.
fascinating as everyone had got up and downs, but everyone wouldn't change a thing because they do know that also during the lows and maybe when you feel that everything it is going south, but there it is when you start learning. So they wouldn't change anything because they do know that those lows are when they learned the most. And so it is nice to see that also from your side, you wouldn't change a thing. But Pushkar, first, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your journey with us today. It has been a real pleasure having you on Behind Numbers.
Thank you, Alessandro, for having me.
And to everyone else listening, thank you for joining us. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow Behind Numbers for more stories from the leaders shaping the future of business and finance. I am Alessandro Cozzi. See you next time.